Hello and welcome everyone to the Varsity Tutors StarCourse series. We're on Monday, it was the 4th of July, and we all celebrated with fireworks. But there may be one thing that's more iconically American than fireworks, and that is, of course, the bald eagle. And we are thrilled to have Elena and our friends at the South Carolina Aquarium, along with their bald eagle, Liberty, here to tell us all about bald eagles, where they live, what they eat, how they act, and everything in between, and get you guys up close and personal with a real bald eagle, because if any other week of the year, this is the one to be able to do it. So before we turn it over to Elena and Liberty, just a couple things you guys probably know if you've been coming to these classes before. One, we want to keep this really interactive. Elena's going to ask you a lot of questions, and you can answer those in the chat box to the right of the screen. And if you have any questions whatsoever, we're going to get as many as we can answered all the way at the end. So keep them coming throughout the class. And in the last 10 minutes or so, I'll interview Elena with your questions. Also, make sure you've got a camera nearby, because you can't meet a bald eagle and not have a selfie to prove it. And so in about a half an hour, really throughout the class, we'll give you guys plenty of opportunities to lean into the screen, snap a selfie with Liberty so you can put it up on your Instagram page. And if you do so and tag Varsity Tutors and South Carolina Aquarium, you'll be entered to win a spot in a virtual summer camp. So with all that said, it's time to turn it over to the stars of today's show. We've got Elena from South Carolina Aquarium, and she's about to introduce you to Liberty.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Elena, and I'm an educator here at the South Carolina Aquarium, and I'm so happy that you are all joining on today to learn about one of my favorite ambassador animals here at the aquarium, Liberty, our bald eagle. And before we get into all of that excitement, I'm just going to share my screen really quick so that we can be familiar with where our bald eagles are found, where we are found too, where you guys are watching from, and where I'm joining you from too. So if you are joining from outside of the United States, go ahead and take a minute, just find yourself on the map here, find your city, your country here. And we are indicated by that red star. We're located on the southeast coast of the United States. So if you are joining from the United States today, I'll zoom in for you so that you can find your city or state here on this map. And once again, we are on the southeast coast of the United States, all the way down there at the bottom with that gold star. That's a photo of our aquarium. And we're really lucky. We are right on the water here in Charleston, right on the Charleston Harbor, and that is right next door to the Atlantic Ocean. I don't know if you can see behind me right now. It's probably a little bit difficult to see, but the Charleston Harbor is just right outside of those windows. So we're really lucky to be right next to the water. But people come into our aquarium and are really confused when they come upstairs and see a bald eagle. A bald eagle is not an animal that you would expect to find in an aquarium, definitely not an aquatic animal, but this animal does like to live near water. But this animal is found all throughout the United States and really almost everywhere in North America too. So this is the distribution map of where we can find bald eagles in the wild. And again, that's where we are right here on the southeast coast. That's our state of South Carolina. And we have bald eagles that hang out here all year round, and some breeding pairs that hang out here too. So you might notice that this map has some different areas for breeding, non-breeding, areas that they might migrate to, and year-round residents as well. But basically the point of this map is to show that these animals can be found pretty much anywhere in the country and can breed anywhere in the country as well. So we're also going to talk about some adaptations. So if you don't know what an adaptation is, that is any trait that can help an animal to survive in their natural habitat. So these are physical traits sometimes, or they can be a behavior that these animals have learned how to do. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my friend Liberty here. I'll turn my camera around so that everybody can get a great look at her, and we're really lucky. She's kind of right front and center right now. She's hanging out right at the front of our exhibit. So this is Liberty, the American bald eagle. So you might be wondering, why are they called bald eagles? And it's not because they don't have any hair or feathers on their head. Bald just means white. So she has an all white head, which is what this species is really distinguishable by. So they have a white head and a big brown body and a little bit of white on their tails as well, as you can see here. So this is not always the case. When these eagles hatch, when they're first born, when they're juveniles too, or kind of like kid or teenager eagles, they are going to be all brown in color. So they'll have a brown head until they kind of mature, come into adulthood about 4 or 5 years old, and then they will develop that bright white head. And these are really large birds, as you can tell from Liberty right here. They have a pretty big wingspan. The females are going to be a little bit bigger than the males too, and that is something called sexual dimorphism. That's a really big fancy term, and basically all that means is that there is a physical difference between males and females, and in their case it's going to be their size. So the females are bigger, about 25% bigger than the males are going to be, So in general, males and females, they'll be about 2 or 3 feet in length, but their wingspan is definitely going to differ a little bit. So females, she's very curious about us being right next to her here. Females are going to have a wingspan of about 7.5 feet, which is pretty crazy. I mean, that's much, much taller than I am. So if you think about a bald eagle's wings alone just being bigger than you as a person, it's pretty crazy to think about. And males are going to be just a little bit smaller, but about 5.5 feet with that wingspan. So some things that we notice right off the bat are her big beak, which I've got a skull here that we can look at a little bit closer. So this is what a bald eagle skull looks like. She's got that really big beak here. This is going to help her tear her food, and we'll talk about what the bald eagle's diet is as well. But she's got pretty big eyes too, and it's kind of hard for us to tell from all the way back here because they're kind of all covered up by feathers, but they have pretty large eyes and really great eyesight too. So I mentioned that while this is not an aquatic animal, these bald eagles do need to and like to live around water. So they're mostly going to be found around open water like the ocean, like our Charleston Harbor right outside, some rivers, lakes, really big ponds. They're going to be found around those water resources because they like to eat fish. So fish is a really big part of their diet, but they're also going to eat some other animals that they can find on land as well. They're going to eat some small mammals, small rodents, small birds too. So this beak is going to be really, really helpful in catching that prey, but also just tearing that prey and being able to swallow it. But one of the main things that she's going to need is her talons. We can kind of see those talons through here. You can see those really, really big sharp nails at the end of her talons. And her talons are going to be mostly what she's going to use to catch her prey. And bald eagles heavily rely on their eyesight to find their prey. We saw those really big eye sockets. They can fly really high up in the air, almost about 1,000 feet high, and be able to search for their prey. Again, tiny, tiny little prey, little rodents, little birds, and tiny fish from 1,000 feet high over a 3 square mile radius, which is pretty, pretty impressive. So their eyesight is about 4 times better than ours as humans. So once they spot that prey, they can fly up to 90 miles an hour, super, super fast to catch that prey. They're going to swoop down and grab it with those big, strong talons. And I've actually got something over here that's going to help us to see how strong their talons are. Their talons have a strength of about 400 PSI. And we have a strength tester right here. It's going to be a little bit hard for us to tell, but I'm squeezing with all of my might right now, and I can barely even get it to budge. And this is only 300 PSI. So our bald eagle's talons are even stronger than that. I am definitely no match for Liberty's talons here. So they're going to use those to catch their prey. And we also notice something else on her talons here too. You might notice a little strap coming down or maybe around her ankles there. One question that we get a lot here at the aquarium is if she is tied to that branch or what her story is or if she can fly at all. And those things that you're seeing around her ankles there, it's called a jess. So this is what it looks like. And she's definitely not tied down to the branch. She can hop around her exhibit and go wherever she pleases, but this is kind of like wearing a watch. And what these jesses are useful for is for handling Liberty when it comes down to her animal care. So when our staff goes in to grab Liberty to give her some checkups, see how she's doing, maybe give her some new things in her exhibit, maybe we need to move her for that. We definitely don't want to just put her big, strong talons right on our arms. That's going to hurt a lot, especially if she's gripping down pretty hard, which she's going to have to do for moving her just to be stable. So those jesses are how we move her safely and move her onto this glove. You may have seen something similar to this before, but this is a really big, thick glove that we use to handle our birds here, especially Liberty. And it's very, very thick, so it helps to protect our animal care staff from those really strong talons. So our other question of, does Liberty fly or can she fly? The answer is no. Unfortunately, Liberty cannot fly, and that's why she's here at the South Carolina Aquarium. So when Liberty was very, very young, she was caught on a telephone wire. And unfortunately, she had an injury on her left wing that had that wing amputated about halfway down. So if she decides to turn around and spread her wings for us and we can check out that wingspan, we'll notice that the left one is a little bit shorter than the other one. And unfortunately, that caused Liberty to lose her ability of flight. And that's definitely a question that we get a lot here in person, because if you look up above her here at her exhibit, this is all open at the top. So we always get questions if she's going to fly out of her exhibit here. But again, the answer is no, she won't be able to fly out, but she's really great at hopping around. She can make it to any one of the branches that you see in her exhibit here. So we definitely want to make sure she's got a lot of places to move and roam in her exhibit. Lots of dynamic things to play with here too, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and what that means for Liberty. But we estimate that she is about 20 years old. She's between 18 and 22. We're not quite sure exactly her age, just because she was a few years old by the time she came to the aquarium in 2008. So that's just kind of an estimate based on her size. So we think she's just about 20. And bald eagles in the wild, oh, maybe she'll show her wings out here. They live to be about 20 to 30 years old in the wild. But in human care, they definitely live a little bit longer. Bald eagles in human care have been documented to be about 40 or 50 years old. So definitely increases that lifespan, almost doubles that lifespan in some cases. And that's because, again, she's got a whole vet staff here that is constantly taking care of her, making sure she gets a restaurant quality diet. All of our animals at the aquarium probably eat better than the staff at the aquarium. They've got very fancy diets composed of some small mammals, rodents. She also gets lots of fish in her exhibit. Sometimes we give her fish popsicles or some live fish in her pond back there to catch by herself too. But we've also got a staff that is giving her regular checkups and making sure that her health is always tip top. So that definitely contributes to a longer lifespan. So I'll show you a little bit more of what her exhibit looks like. Liberty here gets a lot of what we call enrichment. So if you never heard the term enrichment before, if you thought about maybe doing the same thing every single day, waking up, having the same thing for breakfast, taking the same way to school or work, learning about the same exact things every single day, that sounds pretty boring. And we want to make sure that none of our animals at the aquarium ever get bored either. So in order to do that, we do something called enrichment, just to kind of change up their daily routines, give them new things to interact with, and keep their brains nice and active. So I mentioned that with her fish, sometimes we give her fish in this pond right back here, and she can catch that all by herself. So even though she's not in the wild and not able to hunt by herself, it kind of mimics that hunting process or foraging process that she would be doing in the wild. So it's a little bit of enrichment that way. And then of course, sometimes we give her little puzzles like fish pops. We freeze up fish into some sort of shaped popsicle, or we'll give her a cardboard box with a bunch of materials in it with treats hidden inside of it that she kind of has to figure out how to get to them. So that's just kind of another way to stimulate her brain. We also introduce new objects that she might encounter in the wild. If you look over at the bottom of our tree trunk over there, there's actually some wild mushrooms growing on that tree there. So we do give her real live wood. And we also will give her things like snake sheds and other natural materials that she would encounter in the wild, just to kind of spice up her exhibit a little bit here too. So one thing that we might be familiar with about bald eagles is that they are a protected species. It's definitely a species that we love very much, a species that has kind of become a symbol for our country here in America. And the bald eagle was almost completely extinct back in the 1950s. So during the 1950s and 60s, there was a chemical that was largely produced and mass distributed all over the country called DDT. And what DDT was originally was a pesticide that was supposed to, of course, kill bugs on farms, but also prevent mosquitoes mostly from kind of becoming a problem in our country, because at the time they were, and malaria, a disease from mosquitoes, was being widespread. So this chemical was invented to kind of eradicate those mosquitoes, but an unintended consequence of that was that it was affecting a lot of birds and a lot of nature as well. So bald eagles were especially affected by the production of DDT. This was something that was being kind of dropped in from planes over mass areas of crops, and also driven down neighborhood streets as well. People were driving these chemicals pretty much everywhere that you could imagine. And these bald eagles, what happened to them was they sort of slowly ingested this DDT in the food that they were eating, because it was getting washed away during a rainstorm into the waterways, where of course they are fishing and hunting for food. So as they kind of accumulated that DDT in their system, it caused an enzyme to stop functioning in their body that kind of affects how hard their shells are. So these are animals that lay eggs, and they usually lay about 1 to 3 eggs a year. And what this DDT was doing was making their eggshells super, super, super thin. So by making them really thin, when these eagles tried to nest and maybe keep those eggs warm, these eggs were being crushed very, very easily. So their population started to decline because we weren't really seeing a lot of successful new baby eagles. So once we figured out how damaging this chemical was to our environment, it was banned. It was completely banned in the 1960s. And ever since then, our bald eagles have been on a massive, massive incline in their population. So they kind of dropped off to almost about 300 to 400 breeding pairs in the country to about 71,000 breeding pairs that have been documented just a couple years ago. So I'm not sure if they've done a population study since 2019, but that is the most updated number, is that there were over 71,000 breeding pairs of bald eagles. So that was a huge success story, and a really cool one too, because it's one of the first examples that we saw of recognizing this impact that we could have on this animal and being able to make a difference and spreading that awareness of this chemical and how it was affecting this animal that we love, and making something positive out of it, turning that story around and increasing the population of these bald eagles here. She's definitely very curious about the camera. She keeps looking back and forth here. Sometimes she's a little bit camera shy. She might even vocalize a little bit for us. And vocalizations from bald eagles are actually a little bit different than we might be thinking. Usually in movies or TV shows, they will actually use a sound bite of a kestrel, which is another type of falcon, definitely another bird of prey, but nothing like what an eagle sounds like. So they will use falcon sounds that kind of maybe sound a little bit more, I don't want to say majestic right in front of her, but maybe a little bit more majestic, whereas a bald eagle noise is a little bit more high-pitched, and it's kind of more of a ringing sound. So hopefully we'll be able to hear some of that vocalization before the end of our program today. So other than that DDT, bald eagles really don't have a lot of natural predators. In the wild, they're usually most vulnerable as babies. So as eggs, they're definitely vulnerable to some raccoons, kind of like sea turtle eggs too. They're just kind of out and about and available for predators that come across them. Or maybe as they're really young, when they're fledglings and they're kind of leaving the nest for the first time, when they're about 4 months old, that's usually when they have their first flight. They could be vulnerable at that point too. They're not really too great at being eagles yet. They haven't developed a whole lot of skills to avoid predators. Just like any young animal, they could be vulnerable to some larger mammals too. But the really awesome thing about bald eagle breeding is that they are monogamous, which means that they choose one mate for life, and they will return to the same nest year after year as well. And this kind of provides some pretty impressive nesting as well. So when they're returning to the same nest, that means that they're spending a lot of time and energy in building that nest too, with that one partner. So when they're working together, they're going to work together to build the nest. They're going to work together to also take care of the eggs, take care of the babies before they leave the nest too. And once they create that nest, sometimes they can be about 10 feet wide and 8 feet deep, which again, 10 feet, 8 feet, both very much larger than me. I'm only a little bit over 5 feet. So just picturing myself being able to fit in an entire bald eagle nest is just really crazy to think about. So when they're mating as well, when they have their courting displays, they're actually pretty intricate, and they're really cool to watch. It's kind of a rare sight, so really awesome if you do get to observe that behavior. Or I encourage you guys to maybe look it up and see some photos or videos of it after our program today. But they will do these really amazing courting displays of flying really quickly around each other. Almost looks like they're doing cartwheels in the air. They're spinning around, and eventually they will lock talons mid-air, and they will lock talons and spin in a circle, almost like this, spinning in a circle until they're just about to hit the ground. And then they will release those talons and break apart right before they hit the ground. And that is how they mate and do that courting behavior, which is just a really, really cool thing to see for our bald eagles. So even though DDT was banned in the 1960s, it is still something that we're seeing in our environment today. It's something that we're still finding in our waterways. It's what we call a legacy contaminant or a persistent contaminant, which is basically any chemical that is no longer being produced, no longer being put out there still, but we're still finding it in different animals and environments, or even the sediment maybe at the bottom of the waterway as well. So this is something that we can find in sediments to this day, and sometimes even find in some larger mammals that may accumulate it over time as well. So we had a really amazing success story with the bald eagles in banning that chemical and seeing that population increase. But it's still something that we can always do to protect our eagles and really any of our animals, is just kind of being mindful of some of the pesticides that maybe we use in our gardens, maybe searching for some more environmentally friendly household cleaning products and pesticides to use around our houses can be a really huge help for these animals too. And then, of course, always making sure that all of our trash and recycling always ends up where it should and nowhere outside, because no matter where you live, it's a pretty good chance that bald eagles live there too. So we looked at that distribution map and saw that those bald eagles are pretty much found everywhere. So we definitely don't want to leave anything outside for them to find first. All right, I don't want to hold you guys up anymore. I know you guys probably have a lot of questions about our bald eagle here. And I'm so excited to hear all of your questions about liberty in general or about bald eagles in general.
All right. Thank you so much, Elena. Thanks to all of you for all of your amazing questions. We're going to get to those questions in a second, but we did promise and didn't officially call out you guys to get a selfie with Liberty to be able to put up on Instagram. And so I think we've got a great shot right now. Maybe, Elena, I'm going to spotlight you if you want to give us a couple different angles on it. We'll give everybody about 15 seconds to make sure you get those pictures. Remember, if you put them up on Instagram, tag Varsity Tutors in South Carolina Aquarium, you'll be entered to win a spot in a virtual summer camp this summer. So let's go back full screen to Liberty so you guys can get those pictures.
Yes, absolutely. This is a perfect spot to get that photo. She's kind of hanging out right front and center. She was hiding a little bit earlier behind that branch, so I'm glad that she decided to stay here for our program today. Try and get my camera a little bit in more too, so you can get a better angle. Great, and I'll go around to see the front of her face.
All right, thank you. And hopefully everybody got some great pictures. We look forward to seeing those up on Instagram. But like Elena mentioned, you guys have had a lot of questions and we want to get you some answers. A lot of people wanted to, we all know that the bald eagle is this major symbol of the U.S. Do we know much about how the bald eagle was chosen? You know, what makes the bald eagle such an American icon?
That's a great question. I think that this animal was kind of chosen as an icon when their populations were sort of on the decline. And I think it had to do a little bit with that success story, with that population increase that we saw after they were put on the Endangered Species Act. And we all kind of came together for this species, this, of course, majestic looking species, and kind of have their distribution all throughout the country. So I think it's pretty fitting to have one of our ambassador animals as a country as one who is pretty much found anywhere where we could live. But I also think that it definitely has to do with their looks too. They're very, very beautiful animals, very powerful animals too, and of course, very majestic.
Absolutely leads me to one of my favorite questions. Has Liberty ever seen herself or one of her relatives on money? Does she see any of those symbols out there to kind of remind her that you are a big deal?
That is a really good question. So sometimes a part of their enrichment is we can actually put a mirror in their exhibit and kind of just watch them check themselves out. It definitely piques their curiosity a lot and just a really great way to get their brain engaged. So she's definitely seen herself before. She knows how beautiful she is, I think, in my opinion. She's one of the divas at the aquarium, right next to our sea turtle Coretta, if anyone is familiar with her. But that's a great question. I'll have to propose that to our animal care staff, that we get some American symbols in here, just so that she knows for sure.
That'd be fantastic. She really has a right to know. Couple other questions about that majestic look. Some folks want to know a lot about the coloration. So if I can ask two about the coloration. One, do they look like that when they're born, or are they all dark colored or all white when they're born? And then two, is there an evolutionary adaptation that gives them that distinctive, white bald head? Is there a reason that helps them in the wild?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when they are first born, they are going to be all kind of dark in coloration. And then they will mature around 4 or 5 years of age. And that's when they start to get that white plumage that comes in. In terms of an adaptation, I think that in the forest that they live in, it is a little helpful to be kind of splotchily colored. It kind of helps them blend in a little bit more. But also I think that it has to do with mating as well. So recognizing adult pairs and finding a mate, I think, is also a pretty good reason to have that big bald head.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for amazing questions. We'll keep them coming. Speaking about, the ability to find a mate, that mating dance sounds absolutely fascinating. We'll have to look out for that in the wild whenever we can. Questions about, are they social? I think we tend to see one at a time in American iconography, but are they social? Do they have friends? And then a follow-up to that is Liberty in particularly. Does she have other eagle friends? Does she have any babies? What can you tell us about that?
All great questions. So they definitely mate for life and will stick with that one mate for the rest of their lives. But if that mate, unfortunately, doesn't make it somehow in nature, they will look for another mate. So it's not so much about being a social creature and wanting to be around other eagles, but it's kind of more of an alliance or a partnership where they can work together to reproduce, but also forage together. They'll hunt and help each other out finding food and create a home, a habitat with those really, really huge nests as well. So not so much about being social creatures and communicative or emotional creatures like we are, or maybe like some other animals like dolphins, but I think it's more about survival adaptation. So kind of working together. Group living has a lot of advantages to it, like food, shelter, all of those great things there. And Liberty doesn't have any other eagles here. They are actually pretty territorial as well. So if she were to have another eagle in her exhibit, probably wouldn't go too well. She's got a pretty sweet setup here with all of the love and care and attention that she gets from our animal care staff. So I don't know how happy she'd be about sharing that with anybody else. But in the wild, they will, of course, find that one mate, but they wouldn't necessarily be receptive to some group hangouts.
Got it. Thank you. On that note, actually, about being territorial, I think that's a great preface to this next question I really like. Someone to know, hey, those nests are huge. If you were to find one in the wild and it was, up in a tree, could you climb into it and sit in there without it falling to the ground? And I like that we preface it with they're territorial. Please do not try this. Totally a hypothetical question, but we know they're big. Could humans sit around in them?
I love that question. Personally, if I found one, I think it would be really hard for me not to just want to see if I could fit in it. But of course, we definitely don't want to do that because they are territorial. And I mentioned that talon strength is almost more than double our bite force strength as humans. So definitely don't want to get caught up in those talons or that really, really sharp beak at all. But I'm sure that some humans definitely could fit inside of those nests, and it kind of depends on the nesting material. So these birds, they will really look for anything that they can add as nesting material, and an ideal nesting material is going to be some hardwood sticks. These bald eagles like to live in old growth hardwood coniferous forests. So this is really hardwood that they're going to mostly use for nesting material, but that doesn't mean that they don't also pick up some smaller twigs. Unfortunately, sometimes they pick up plastics to use as nesting material as well. So I would say maybe test out the strength of that nest before you hop into it. But of course, don't do that because we want to avoid those sharp things.
Awesome. Thank you. That's the most important advice. Is it's a great question to ask, but not something you necessarily want to do. Which leads to another one of my favorites. We know the talons have that incredible force. We know they've got the sharp beaks. What would you say is the most dangerous part of the eagle? Is it the talons? Is it the beak? Is it something else we haven't even talked about?
I think I would definitely say talons, just because, I mean, while the beak is very sharp, it's not necessarily what they're going to use first to attack their prey. Their talons are their kind of first line of defense when they are defending themselves or grabbing prey, and it's much, much stronger than their beak is as a whole. So I would definitely vote talons on that one.
I say there's more than one of them too. There's they could probably work together in some fashion there. So I think smart too, to steer clear of those. Which a lot of people wanted to know too. If you've worn the glove and had Liberty, what does that feel like even with the glove? Has anyone there ever tried it without the glove, and what did that feel like? Like, what can you tell us about just like the weight or the feeling of a talons? What does it feel like to hold the bald eagle?
Yeah, I have never held Liberty myself before, and that is because since she is a giant bird of prey, but also she is someone that we definitely want to be careful with handling. There's only a few people that work at the aquarium that are allowed to handle Liberty, and some more of our more charismatic animals that need some more care. So I've never personally held Liberty before, but I wish that I could hear some of your guesses on how much she weighs, because I bet it is probably a high number. She looks like a really big bird. No offense, Liberty, but her bones are hollow. So their bones are hollow because that makes them very light. It's very easy to fly around with hollow bones. And even though she looks like she might weigh about 20 to 30 pounds, she only weighs about 8 pounds. So she's a pretty light bird, even for her size, which it always really shocks people. We have a jug of sand that we like to take out sometimes that weighs exactly 8 pounds. And we ask our guests to hold it and kind of take a guess how much she weighs. And usually people are pretty far off from that 8 pounds. And I definitely would be too if I didn't know that already. But yeah, she's pretty light in general.
That's amazing. I think a lot of us can envision like an 8-pound bowling ball is a pretty light. It's like the lightest bowling ball they have, and yet that massive animal with the huge nest only weighing 8 pounds is pretty wild. We had obviously a bunch of guesses coming in. I don't think I saw any 8s, so thanks for that. Hey, you mentioned amazing eyesight, which is pretty wild to think about them. 1,000 feet up, being able to spot tiny creatures like that. Do they use any other senses? Like someone want to know specifically about smell, or is there any other kind of sense like radar, sonar type things that they use to hunt, or is it pretty much just the eyesight?
Yeah, great question. So they don't have any radar or sonar like some bats do that help them find their food. And they can smell, but their sense of smell really isn't super great. So they're not going to heavily rely on that. I would say that eyesight is definitely their most powerful tool that they're going to use when they're hunting, especially because most of the time when they're hunting their food, they're going to be doing so from really high up in the air. So that's just the best tool to use from kind of that, for lack of better terms, bird's eye view, looking down and finding that prey that way.
And on that note, too, coming from 1,000 feet up, a few people wanted to know if you could compare them to other birds or other animals in terms of speed. How fast do they fly in a straight line? And then how fast are they shooting down from the sky once they've identified prey and want to go get it? Is there any chance of getting away? How quick are they?
They're very, very fast. So they can fly up to 90 miles an hour, and that's going to be fastest. So I would say that's probably not going to be their soaring or cruising speed. That's probably going to be when they lock in on some prey and want to swoop down and grab it. 90 miles an hour is super, super quick for a lot of our bird species, even our other birds of prey. But there is one bird called a peregrine falcon who is the fastest bird, and they can fly well over 100. I believe it's 140 miles an hour at their top speed, which is just crazy to think about. But I think that bald eagles are kind of a close second. I'm not sure if there's anybody in between there, but if there is, probably not a lot. I would say that these are some of the top 2 fastest birds.
That really is incredible. 90 miles an hour is way too fast to be driving, and yet they're flying along at that rate. So I'm glad I'm not, on their food chain list of prey for sure. Hey, thank you for all these. I think maybe we can end with one more. We're living in a golden age of bald eagles, like you mentioned. We've seen their population numbers come back, so they're pretty much everywhere, like we saw on those maps. For those of us who would want to see them out in the wild someday, do you have any advice on where should we look? What should we do? What should we not do if we want to go check out bald eagles in the wild?
Definitely. So I think that you're mostly going to find these animals around a big body of water, or maybe a not so big body of water. We definitely see them hunting in the Charleston Harbor sometimes, but I've also seen them in some pretty tiny creeks and rivers too. They can easily find some fish to feed on there as well. Most of the time when you're going to see them, it's going to be pretty difficult. You got to really look hard for those white heads hiding within the trees and all the leaves there. But sometimes you can find them maybe sitting on a rock jetty or on the sand or rocks right next to a river or stream, possibly feeding on some fish there. So I would say for all of our wildlife, definitely view them from a distance and admire them from a distance. With our bald eagles, I don't think that you'll have so much trouble with that, because usually the thing is that they're pretty hard to find. You've got to maybe take some binoculars with you and look pretty hard in those forests, but definitely anywhere around a body of water or a coniferous forest. So this is going to be a hardwood forest.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, great advice. Thanks so much to you, to Liberty, and to everyone at South Carolina Aquarium for getting us up close and personal with the bald eagle, learning all about, what makes them bald eagles so majestic and all those kind of things. Thanks to all of you out there as well for some amazing questions and participation. We look forward to seeing those selfies up online. And so I'm going to leave us with the instructions to be able to enter that contest. We always love checking those out. So here is how you can enter the contest there. South Carolina Aquarium will be back here later in the summer with all kinds of other amazing animals. So thanks to Elena. Thanks to all of you out there, and we'll see everybody back here soon.
Thanks, everybody.